You're listening to I Don't Do That, a lifestyle podcast with me, Ocho. I get to talk to lots of different people about all the things that they don't do, and you get to hear what they say. Na 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 na, yeah, no, I don't do that, no, I don't do that. You know it's alright, you can ask, but I don't do that, no, I don't do that. I don't do that. I don't do that. Episode 3.
I mean, at the end of the day, we are like flesh and blood.
Episode 3 is I Don't Use Social Media. We're joined via landline today with Marcia, who doesn't use social media. Marcia is an art teacher in the Northwestern United States. She's in her early 40s, and she identifies herself as female and Caucasian. Marcia, I'm very happy to talk to you today, and I'd just like to get into it if we can.
Yeah.
Will you tell me about what history you have with social media, if any? Have you ever used it?
Okay, so I have a friend that contacted me, want to say 13, 14 years ago, said, hey, a lot of us are using Facebook to stay in touch because he was an old college friend of mine that I didn't live near at the time, and I still don't. And then I asked another friend that was in closer proximity to help me set up a Facebook page. Mm-hmm. I seem to recall, but I don't know who helped me set it up. Mm-hmm. But then my use was really limited, and I never posted a picture of myself. Mm-hmm. But I do seem to remember that other people posted pictures of me to the page. So is that something that, because I'm not real knowledgeable about it, but that's something that's done?
For sure, yep.
Okay, and I had a couple friends that I hadn't, talked to in many years, because at this time I'm in college, and these are people from way back in high school in a different state. And OMG, Marcia, I haven't talked to you in forever. Totally want to know what's up with you, right? Yeah. And they did it on a messenger thing on the Facebook page.
Yep.
Similar to an email, but on the Facebook page.
Yep.
So I emailed back hey, great to hear from you, and here's kind of what I've been up to, and what about you? What have you been up to? But then I didn't even get responses.
Sure.
I think this happened with a couple people.
Sure.
And I thought, maybe this isn't really a great way to keep in touch with people. Maybe I should try to contact them in a more direct format. Mm-hmm. And I also had, and I really only think I ever went onto my page a handful of times.
Yeah.
But I had a friend. Well, see, she was somebody where we had kind of had a falling out, growing apart sort of thing, where I didn't really want to hear from this person again. No real hard feelings, just I've moved on, Mm-hmm. And I get hey, will you friend me? So great to find you on this thing. Mm-hmm. And I felt kind of oh, well, see, it's mean or rude maybe not to friend her, but I don't really...
you don't feel like you're friends with her. You're not really friends.
Yeah, and I just, and so the whole thing seemed a little awkward to me, and I just basically, after just only checking out my page a handful of times, probably less than 10 times ever in my life, I just decided I wasn't going to use it anymore.
Yeah. I think... I mean, I've heard from a lot of people that social media is pretty insincere. I mean, that might be what you're getting at. Would you say that speaks to what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. And then maybe that's what drove you away from it. It's they're actually going out of their way to send you a direct message and ask you what's up, and then they don't keep in touch with you. They don't reply to you when you tell them.
Right. So insincere, perhaps, in some situations there,
and then somebody else wants to have you in their network, but isn't really friends with you, and maybe you didn't part on good terms, and they're not even you're not friends, right?
Right, and then it didn't necessarily feel very personal or direct.
Yep.
So
that's that. And so, is it fair to say that then after that you just sort of fell off and you were like, "That's not for me"? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then people whose like email addresses I had, I emailed and said this, I would prefer email contact or phone call. Here's my phone number. And then the only other time I've kind of been on Facebook since then, and that was back in like I said, 12 years ago or something, maybe the last time I ever checked it out, was just to go, like, because say I want to look at a local hair salon or restaurant or something,
Right.
It provides free advertising for people, so sometimes that's how I can find their menu or their hours of operation or something.
Sure. I was going to ask you that too. So you do sometimes use Facebook as just a tool to get information. You look at a public page or something like that.
Yeah, just kind of by default, because that's the primary means that some businesses will use.
Absolutely.
And so to find out.
Yeah, I mean, I have more traffic on my Facebook page than like on my website. So, I mean, I would say that's my primary source of getting my stuff out there myself for my own business,
Right, and so I'm an artist. I've considered even maybe setting up a page to advertise my art. My husband owns a small business. We've
Sure.
kind of talked more about his business, setting up a page
Sure.
to help advertise for his business.
Yeah.
So that's something that we've considered. We haven't really taken any steps towards at this time.
Yep, but it isn't off the table. You think that it might be strategic at some point, it might be useful. But
Yeah.
as it is, it doesn't sound like you really are into using it for socializing at all.
Correct.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. So, what was it like to stop? Did anyone notice? Did anyone say anything? Did you feel anything?
No. I didn't hear from anyone about like it at all. But I think, because I had such a, limited use of it,
Right.
sort of to begin with.
Yep.
So
it was pretty unceremonious stopping.
Mm-hmm.
But how does it look to you from the outside? Like when you see students or peers or somebody like taking a picture of their lunch or a selfie or just having their head on their phone all the time or on a computer screen?
Okay, yeah. So I'm an artist and an art teacher, and this is my 10th year teaching. I teach at middle school and high school grade levels. And we've had a couple of days where no students, virtually no, I shouldn't say none, okay, but a very limited number of students. So maybe out of a class of 25, 2 people show up.
Okay.
Because of some kind of threat on social media.
Wow.
So this has affected public education in a very real way.
Mm-hmm.
I also have seen, distress in students based on bullying, on online bullying.
Yeah.
We've had training seminars on online bullying. And, I actually had a sexual harassment issue come up with a student who was photographing my rear end without my knowledge, posting it, and inappropriate comments posted with it. I would not have known, being someone that doesn't use social media, but like a student told me that she saw it.
Yeah.
I had something where someone did drink some paint water, right, on a dare, where it was posted on Snapchat.
Mm-hmm.
And it was without my knowledge that it had been videotaped or that the student was drinking it.
Was this in your class then that happened?
In my classroom, I do work really hard to observe the behavior of all of my students and be engaged with them. But I think teachers are human at the end of the day, and so we miss some things.
Of course.
Right?
I've played a lot of pranks on teachers. You know, I'm not, I don't have any experience like working in a classroom, but I haven't been in school in a long time. So you're in a small town. What kind of threat is posted on social media that's going to prevent kids from going to school?
The type of threat that, the student was planning to bring a gun to school.
Oh, okay. So
and then there was something called, you have to understand, this is all from an outsider. There is so much I don't understand about the programs and how to use them because I don't use them.
Sure.
But there was some kind of threat, and then there was like a post, a concerned parent, a bunch of other concerned parents posting. Additionally, okay, and now everybody's like, well, I'm not sending my kid tomorrow, and then that just spreads and nobody's sending their kid except a very limited number of people.
Right.
And then there was a different time, this other situation where it happened, where it was like a TikTok challenge.
Sure.
So it was like a nationwide, my understanding was, there was like low attendance all over the country that day because of a violent TikTok challenge to shoot up your school.
Oh, wow. Myself not having kids and not being involved in that world, there's a lot of stuff I don't hear about.
I don't have, because I can't, and I wouldn't want to tell anyone else how to live their life, and if it's something that helps them feel connected and they enjoy it for entertainment or whatever, I don't pass judgment on that. I have seen, like, in my life, some, like I was giving examples as an educator, some real problems that have come up that have kind of risen from it. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't also accomplish good. It doesn't really fit in with my worldview because I'm admittedly, like, distrustful of new technology. And I think that's one side of it. And then another thing is, as an educator, we hear a lot at staff meetings, be very, very careful about what you post on social media. Do not tell anyone. Don't even mention you're a teacher. I've heard that. Don't tell them what district you work for. Don't tell them anything, because there's confidentiality issues that are very important to my profession.
Sure.
So the fact that I already didn't really like using it just worked to my advantage, because I'm just like, I don't like it anyway. But yeah, it has, even though I opt out, it has presented some real problems, right, in my work environment. So there's that.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I can't imagine going, like when I was going to school, if I was in middle school or high school or something, and being afraid. It was a different time and place, I'm in my mid-40s now, and it was a different time and place, but I can't imagine that someone just being able to scare me from going to school forever, kind of.
Yeah, and so I'm in my early 40s.
Right.
So we're in a similar generation.
Yep.
And I know that sometimes classifications are kind of arbitrary, right? But I was reading about people born, in the late 70s and early 80s being described as the Oregon Trail generation. So kind of after the Gen X, but before the millennials. And so these are people like us who came of age during a time when there was a huge shift in communication technology.
For sure.
And so I think because I have this fond memory of my analog childhood, I still prefer a lot of like old technologies to new technologies. I've also heard of our generation referred to as the lucky ones. That was in an article I read because a lot of people didn't really get the luxury of like knowing what privacy felt like in 1985 or something, right? It's like a different animal now.
Oh, yeah. I miss it. I miss that. You know, I can't walk down the street. I mean, it's the truth. Like, my phone is in my pocket. Google knows where I am, and there's cameras everywhere that are taking pictures of me for security and so on. And like, I really can't walk down the street. It's like I'm located. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm being photographed, and there really isn't privacy like there used to be.
And I'm concerned sometimes with the way that shyness or maybe like an introspective type personality is painted as something that needs to be overcome, and that if you want privacy, then maybe you're up to some nefarious activities. Because honestly, that's not necessarily the case, and people should be entitled to private matters, right? We don't necessarily know where that information's going, and we don't necessarily consent.
Mm-hmm.
We have these tools.
Mm-hmm.
And with that comes enormous amounts of responsibility. And like, the people in charge aren't necessarily using them right towards a greater good. And so that's a concern.
How do you imagine your life might be different if you did use social media? Do you think it would be better in any way?
I do have to use a computer for my job, and sometimes like for my own curiosity and research.
Sure.
And I feel often depleted after looking at a screen. There's something about it. It's kind of hypnotic, but I also feel like it's like energy zapping.
Mm-hmm.
And so I prefer not to, like, if I can, like I'd rather write by hand than type something. Sometimes I just write it out by hand and then I type it afterwards, because I feel like in its own way it's more efficient for me to do it that way and more enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not really tempted in any way to like engage in social media.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, okay? There are certain like the internet, for example.
Yeah.
You were around before the internet was public, and you had never used it, and now I think it's fair to say you can't get through your life without it, at least a little bit. Sometimes.
I mean, me personally, I wouldn't be able to live the life that I currently lead without using the internet.
Right. So
that's correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are still people on the earth and in this country and so on who don't have the internet and don't use it. So we can say that. But for you yourself, yeah. So what if social media were to become like that? Or in some way, like you could limit your use of it, but you could never entirely turn it off. Can you imagine how that might change your life? Or would you prefer not to think about that?
For some reason, to me, the more I have to engage with new technologies, the lesser the quality of my life is how I feel personally.
Uh-huh.
I know some people are like totally into it, and it's their livelihood even, and it's like what they enjoy the most in the world. I don't begrudge them it.
Uh-huh.
I think we do have to consider the responsibility end of the situation, because it might not be like for everyone. And I think it's important to allow for alternative lifestyle choices if people want to make those. So I'm concerned about it sort of infiltrating every aspect of our lives to the point where it's increasingly difficult to opt out of, and people don't feel like they have a choice anymore. And for example, with public education, we've seen with the advent of new technologies an increase in standardized testing via the computers. And of course, COVID issued in a whole bunch of distance learning via the computers. And we also have kids socially connecting through their device. And so we have some crazy amount of hours some children are logging in front of a screen, as opposed to maybe like making genuine, like maybe a little bit more human. You know, I mean, you can have a connection. I'm not saying you can't over a computer, but what about looking into someone's eyes? What about holding someone's hand? What about giving someone a hug? You know, like what about just sitting at the dinner table across from them and talking? You know, I think we need to allow for that. That needs to be part of it, because as a friend of mine said, we have like, there's a virtual reality and then there's reality. We don't want to give up totally on the reality, I don't think.
No, I would hope not as well. You know, it kind of begs the question to me, like how much control does anyone or all of us or any of us have over what we do with our technology? Like, the only thing that would stop us from going fast, like for example, like in a car or as fast as we can, would be if something stopped us. Like if there was a fuel shortage or an electromagnetic pulse from space that stopped everything from working. It's like something like that. But I don't see any voluntary. I guess it would be like a voluntary sacrifice of something that is convenient and immediately enjoyable to us, like going fast or like checking up on somebody, seeing a picture of them and their face and finding out what they did today. All that stuff, like giving it up after you have it, I think is a difficult thing.
As much as people are dependent on their new technologies and they, you know, sometimes will say that they enjoy, which I'm sure they do, but there's also this, I feel like a lot of times I hear kind of a love-hate thing going on with computers and phones and so on. And I mean, at the end of the day, we are like flesh and blood. And so, at least for right now, some people, I think, you know, there's that whole like back to the land movement. I don't know. I think some people, even if it means like maybe working harder, prefer that than like say, maybe some alternative way of accomplishing a thing. It can be hard to be an outlier on a social norm because, especially with something like technology, which is equated with progress, but it's not always progress. And like you're saying, it's hard once we've got something going to like go back. But I think when we're looking at like the kind of catastrophic climate change that we're looking at, we have, you know, we are like maxing out power grids in California because of this dependence on AC, because of this incredible heat wave. So we might see more of that kind of thing, like, oh, gee, now I wish I knew which plants were edible. I wish I knew how to, like, find fresh water or whatever. I mean, not to make light of it, but there might be some things that force us back to, like, kind of away from some of these technologies.
Sure. Do you think that the technology could help us with that, too? I mean, I know if I'm trying to forage for something, and I'm not that adept at it, but especially I know people who do, they have an app where they can just point their phone at a plant and it'll tell them what it probably is. You know, it'll identify it.
I've seen that. I really enjoyed that. So great. Right? So I had a couple plants. My friend was over. I said, hey, what is this? What is it like? All of a sudden I know. Right? Because she's got the app and can take the picture, and that is cool. And also, I mean, talking about people that are maybe outliers of a norm, say, you know, I have some transgender students here in this small town, but they can find allies, right, online through these different platforms. So maybe then it helps with the depression and the feeling like nobody understands me, because then, you know, we can find friends, right, and connect.
Sure.
So it's really saving lives and helping people live like more fully on one hand. But then on the other can be very like ugly if used like in the wrong way.
Sure. And ultimately, I mean, I agree with you on those points. And this discussion is just, I mean, I think to sum it up, it's just not for you. And it's not for you right now. And you're not completely closed off to the idea that it could be, but what you've seen of it, it's not for you. And you don't really need it. Am I right about all that?
Yeah, and I mean, I like to play outside, you know, and I like to get my hands dirty, and I like to make messes, and I mean, I'm just a real hands-on, that's my, like, you know, I just like that. I like that. And if I'm connecting with a human, the ideal situation is like in person. That's the best.
Yeah.
You know?
Are you getting that in your life?
I feel like yes. And I've always kind of been someone who prefers like a few close friends to like a whole lot of, you know, acquaintances, say.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, my job requires me to be a lot more social than I think I would even like really actually prefer to be, you know?
I hear that, yeah.
But I have my family and I have a few close friends, and, you know, I mean, I guess in this town, I feel like I would love to kind of forge more relationships with like people my age who have children kind of around my kids' ages.
Right.
Because that really facilitates a lot of fun, like play dates and stuff, and then I can still connect with the adult while the kids are playing with each other.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I feel like is kind of lacking, because a lot of my friends in town here are kind of an older generation, and so it's not like their kids can play with my kids while we're hanging out.
Yeah.
So it's not perfect, but I was reading some study where like almost 40% of Americans are lonely.
Sure.
I don't know. I mean, who knows? Studies can say all kinds of things. I don't know how big the pool was or anything.
Sure.
But I could believe that a lot of us feel lonely at different times.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, you know, I don't really feel like for me personally that social media is going to like resolve that if I'm feeling lonely. So
it kind of begs the question to me, what if there was a Facebook group that was for people in your town that had kids, and it was focused on organizing things for them, like play dates and so on. Events.
It could be good. I feel like it could be good. It might not be good though.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is supposed to be good, right? And there's obviously times when it's not good. So, yeah. One thing that has been good the whole time, though, is talking to you, Marcia. So thank you for being here today. Thank you. Thank you all for listening, too. Please visit idon'tdothatpodcast.com/give to make a donation in the amount of your choosing. That's idon'tdothatpodcast.com/give. It would help us very much. And to show our appreciation, we give you access to exclusive content with a donation of any amount. Thanks for listening to I Don't Do That. I don't do that. My name is Ocho, your host, chief engineer, and producer. I also composed and performed the theme song. Background music was performed throughout today's episode by Peter Klug. Shout out to our sponsor, Anders with Primetime Web. Much gratitude to Marcia, today's guest, who reminds us to stay human. We're out here sharing our stories to celebrate the diversity of human experience. My name is Ocho, and I will talk to you again, if I'm lucky.
I'm concerned sometimes with the way that shyness or maybe like an introspective type personality is painted as something that needs to be overcome, and that if you want privacy, then maybe you're up to some nefarious activities. Because honestly, that's not necessarily the case, and people should be entitled to private matters, right?
Do you have an interesting, heartfelt, or entertaining story about something that you don't do? If you'd like to be a guest on I Don't Do That, please visit ochotunes.com/guest to apply to be a guest on our show.